Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Professor Jonah Berger, who is a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's the author of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller Contagious: Why Things Catch On. Jonah, real pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you've written a fascinating book filled with great stories. What inspired you to get started on this project?
I think everyone realizes the power of word of mouth. If you think about the last restaurant you tried or the last book you read, we know that our friends and colleagues at work and social ties have a big impact on our own behavior. And indeed, social media has only made that even easier to see. But while it's clear that word of mouth matters, there wasn't a lot of research out there on why people share word of mouth, why people talk about some things rather than others, why some content goes viral on the internet, and why certain rumors and urban legends get passed on. And so I spent the last 10 years doing research in this space, and I thought it was a great opportunity to share some of that research with the population at large.
So before we go into the why this actually is the phenomenon that we see, let's try and put some value on this. When people make decisions based on word of mouth, it seems to me, and I see this from an investment perspective because my day job is that I'm an investment advisor, but it seems to me that a lot of times people just make really poor decisions because their friends did it. Is that true?
We tend to follow our friends for both better and worse. There's that old adage, monkey see, monkey do, and that's not entirely correct. But a lot of times the fact that other people is doing something provides information that maybe we should do the same thing. Hey, I don't know which stock to choose. Well, what's somebody else choosing? I don't know which retirement plan to choose. Well, what did my friend choose? Or even just which restaurant to go to. Well, if it's full, then we assume it's pretty good. And so we use other people as a shortcut or heuristic to judgment, making it easier for us and faster for us to make decisions. Sometimes that leads us to the right places. It leads us to good restaurants and good choices. And other times that leads to herd markets and making bad decisions. And, cases where we make bad stock picks or pick the wrong retirement plan.
Okay, so I think that's a very good lesson, which is that certainly just because other people are doing it, and I certainly would think that in the stock market, that's not a reason that we should necessarily follow suit. As my mother always told me, well, if your best friend would jump off the Empire State Building, would you do that too? So I definitely see what you're saying. So you talk in your book about there's a method actually to make things go viral. Can you explain first off about the basis of this concept of going viral and maybe tell us some of those steps?
Sure. Sometimes when we look at content that gets shared on the web or brands that get a lot of word of mouth, you might think, well, it's random or it's a luck or it's chance. You got to bottle lightning or something like that. But I've worked with all sorts of companies and organizations to help them apply these ideas with some amazing results. There's some key principles that drive people to share all sorts of things. And in the book Contagious: Why Things Catch On, I talk about what I'd call the 6 key steps. And STEPS is an acronym. It actually has 2 Ps. I wasn't clever enough to come up with an acronym that was a perfect word, but STEPS with 2 Ps, which stands for social currency, triggers, emotion, public, practical value, and stories. And each of those is a research-based principle, an evidence-based principle we've seen again and again across industries drive people to talk and share and drive all sorts of products, ideas, and even behaviors to catch on and become popular.
Okay, so say the 6 again.
It stands for social currency, triggers, emotion, public, practical value, and stories.
Okay, so one of them that you're touching on, which I think is great, is that your book, in fact, was filled with stories. The one that I showed my wife, in fact, before we were speaking, was about the most expensive sandwich. Can you tell us that story? Because it's just such a great story to get people on board.
So in the city of Philadelphia, on the side of one of the most high-end parks, little parks in the city, is a restaurant called Barclay Prime. And Barclay Prime is a high-end steakhouse. So you can think about whatever high-end steakhouse you have near you, and Barclay Prime is sort of like that, a little more of a nouveau take on old traditions, but still, high-end different types of steak and aged this and, high-end sides, creamed spinach and the like, and all sorts of champagne. There are a lot of restaurants like Barclay Prime. Even in the city of Philadelphia, there are dozens of other steakhouses. And restaurants, like most other businesses, tend to close. There's a lot of competition. Having good food, having a good brand is not enough. But Barclay Prime has actually stuck around for 10 years. It's done extremely well. And if you talk to people, the one thing that people talk about when they leave that restaurant is the $100 cheesesteak. Now, in case your listeners are not familiar with a cheesesteak, maybe they are, but cheesesteaks are usually something that are $5 or $6. You get them on the corner. They have a little bit of chopped beef, some cheese on top, maybe some grilled onions on a hoagie or sandwich roll. A $100 cheesesteak is extremely decadent. And this thing comes with Kobe beef. It comes with a little bit of truffles on top. It has lobster. It has Taleggio cheese. It comes with a half bottle of champagne. Most people don't even order this. When you look at the number that they sell on a daily basis, it's not actually that high. But whenever people talk about that restaurant, that's what they talk about. They share word of mouth about the $100 cheesesteak. Even if they haven't been, they tell people, can you believe this place has a cheesesteak that's $100? And so that word of mouth really helped the restaurant catch on. It got picked up by the business press, but even just person-to-person word of mouth, people know the restaurant for the $100 cheesesteak. They come, even if they don't get it, to check the thing out. And so because of that, Barclay Prime has succeeded.
That is an amazing story. We're talking with the author of the best-selling book, Contagious, Why Things Catch On. His name is Professor Jonah Berger. He's actually at the University of Pennsylvania. And his book really teaches, first off, I think that the point of the book maybe is for companies to learn how to make their ideas catch on and go viral. So I'd like to drill in on this for two reasons. One is for people who are listening who might own companies and want to take advantage of that. But the other thing is just as consumers or as investors to be able to realize what's going on. It seems that what you're saying is that the success in advertising is not at all random, but if people follow the 6 steps, then there's really a science behind it. Is that true?
Definitely, and I've worked with all sorts of companies and organizations. Most recently, I did a big social media audit for Samsung, analyzing thousands of pieces of their social media content to look at what was successful and what wasn't. Have worked with all sorts of companies, organizations, from Google and Coca-Cola to General Mills and General Motors, and even small brands and small companies and organizations. And again, you see that these principles, they just work. It's not just in business. It's not just like we flip a switch when we're talking about products and brands. We do these things in our everyday lives. We tell stories all the time because it's the way we share information. Social currency is all about the fact that we talk about things that make us look smart or in the know. We do that whether we're talking about products or whether we're talking about our kids. The more proud we are of something, the better something makes us look, the more likely we are to share it. And so these principles are really at the heart of human behavior, and they can be applied to help all sorts of companies and organizations become more successful.
So you mentioned social media, and one of the points I think that you made in the book is that there might be this illusion today that social media has simply taken over the way we all interact, but that's not really, in fact, the case, that people, even that physical word of mouth, which actually is talking to your friend, is moving markets much more than social media. Is that the case, and are we changing?
Word of mouth is extremely important, and social media is definitely a new way that people talk and share. It's allowed people to share information faster and more broadly than ever before. But if you look at the data and you actually look at how much word of mouth is online, most people think it's like 50% or 60%. If you look closer, it's actually only 7%. 7% of word of mouth is online, much smaller than people might think. And what that means is that, online is just one channel through which people talk and share. We still have breakfast face-to-face with our family, lunch with our colleagues at work, and we grab a drink after work with our friends. Those face-to-face interactions, those are the original social media. Sure, social media is a new technology, but rather than focusing on the technology, we need to think about the psychology. Why do people talk and share? Because just because you have a lot of friends or a lot of followers doesn't mean they'll pass on your content. Sometimes things go viral or things get highly shared from brands that don't have that many followers. And so if you understand why people share, you can get people to share all sorts of information.
I think bringing it back to the investment world, I think a lot of times people want to share an investment they've done because it makes themselves feel as though they must have done something smart. I bought such and such a mutual fund, so if I tell my friends and they buy it too, it's going to prove to myself that I've made a good decision, which of course is not necessarily always true. Is that one of the reasons people like to talk about their moves?
Certainly, and I would describe that in some ways as social currency. If you think about which type of transactions people talk about, they talk about the ones where they did well. Hey, I bought this stock, before everybody else bought this stock, 2 months before everybody else. I tell the story, and I know nothing about financial markets, but I bought Apple when Apple was at $19 a share. Now, I don't tell people about the time I bought a stock that tanked, it lost half of its value, but I tell that Apple story because it makes me look good. It makes me look smart and in the know. And so people are more likely to talk about their wins than their losses. It not only makes them feel good and look smart, but it helps them, as you talked about, bolster the notion that they made a good decision.
That's a great point. We actually spoke on the Goldstein on Gelt show a while back with Dan Ariely from Duke University, who brought up a very similar point. He said that when people would choose what stocks to sell, they would always want to sell their winners because it made them feel like a winner, even if from a investment standpoint that wasn't necessarily a better choice compared to possibly selling their losers. So I think there's a lot of, as you're describing, a huge amount of psychology that goes into making these decisions, which really may have no basis in the actual fundamental economic decisions of making a choice.
People think about humans as economic calculators. Oh, if I just add up these things and weigh exactly the costs and the balances, that's how we make decisions. And that's really not the way it works. We're behavioral animals. We're social animals. We look to what others are doing as information for what we should do. And sometimes we're biased and sometimes we make bad decisions, but those same things often lead us to make good decisions. Imagine if you didn't rely on word of mouth, or imagine if you didn't look to what others are doing. Imagine if every decision you made, you had to do all the research on it yourself. Life would be overwhelming. We would barely be able to get past choosing what to have for breakfast before it was time for dinner, and then another day would happen. And so relying on others is often a useful strategy for making good choices, though in some cases it does lead us astray.
Yeah, I guess we've all seen that. Anyway, for any of you who would like to learn more about this, it's a fascinating book to read, Contagious by Jonah Berger. Jonah, in the last few seconds, just tell us, how can people continue to follow your work?
Sure. So Contagious, Why Things Catch On is available on Amazon or wherever books are sold. It just came out in its 34th language, so whatever you like it in, it's available. And you can also find me at Jonah, that's just Jonah, Berger, Berger.com. There's a bunch of free resources up there, as well as a workbook that you can use to apply the framework from Contagious.
Okay, and we will put a link to all of that at the show notes at goldsteinongelt.com. Jonah Berger, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.